What's up, Flannelverse? It is time for the final Flannel Up and Showdown of the season. Excited to talk about this Super Bowl matchup. Also, pretty sad that this is the final edition of this show for the year. It's been a lot of fun. I've said it many times, and it is absolutely true. When I first did this show, the beginning of the season, I thought maybe we'll get 25, 30 people watching. We weren't going to get a ton of viewership, and I've been really happy with the number of people who have stuck around in the Flaniverse for these shows week after week. I think we made it every single Monday, Thursday, and Sunday of the year did one of these shows. So glad that we get to do one more of these. I know many of you, I'm not going to see some of you probably until next NFL season. I know there are a lot of people who only play NFL DFS, but if you guys want to keep in touch with people who are in chat with me, you can join the Flannelverse Discord. The link is in the description of this video. Of course, I'll be doing plenty of best ball content on this channel. I'll be doing NBA DFS. Who knows? Maybe I'll do MLB DFS. I don't know exactly what I have in store, but a lot of stuff on this channel coming up. So if you guys want to keep in touch, you can make sure you subscribe to the channel for one thing. I've said all year my goal was to get to this is not updated. I think I'm behind a little bit, but my goal is to get to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the NFL season. That is clearly not going to happen. We're not getting there today, but still, if you would subscribe, get me a little bit closer, would appreciate it. Still trying to get there by the end of the year. All right. We're going to get into it. The usual format here, going position by position: quarterbacks, running backs, receivers, tight ends, defenses, kickers. I'll take a brief look at FanDuel. I know that there are some people who are playing FanDuel on the slate as well. Then I will come back and play around with lineups, take any questions, etc. I did start the show a little bit earlier, in part so that I can get to Super Bowl festivities after the show, after I make my lineups, but also maybe I'll spend a little bit more time on the lineups portion of the show. But we're going to start with quarterbacks. And actually, let me, I'm going to pull up my article. Not going to pull it up on the screen, but just make sure I have my notes in front of me. The quarterbacks are fairly straightforward, though. This is the final game. We have a full year of seeing how these guys, not just how good they are. We know how good these quarterbacks are, but like how they are utilized. So we kind of know that Patrick Mahomes, at this point, we can be confident this late in his career. He likes to run a little bit more in the playoffs, or I should say he's more willing to run more in the playoffs. We've seen this. He scored, I think, 2 rushing touchdowns against the Bills, as I recall. So running a little bit more, but he is getting a crazy amount of, I shouldn't say crazy, he's getting a lot of ownership. Patrick Mahomes currently projected for 15% captain ownership. That is the most on the slate. Also projected for 49% flex ownership. With Mahomes, the captain ownership for me is a pretty clear fade. I'll be underweight to the field on Mahomes in the captain spot. Don't usually love a quarterback being chalky in the captain spot, just because you need it to be a high scoring game. For the quarterback to be the optimal captain, they either need to run a lot, which it's a little bit murkier because Mahomes does run more in the playoffs. So he's less of a, I mean, he's never a statue quarterback, but he's a little bit more likely to put up 10 fantasy points, 12 fantasy points, even more against the Bills, I suppose, on the ground than he is during the regular season. But it's still not the likeliest outcome with Mahomes. More often when he's scoring fantasy points, he's doing it through the air. But ultimately, I think that I'm expecting it to be a low-scoring game. Obviously, there are a lot of different ways this game can go. Pretty hard to predict how this game in particular, I think, is a pretty tough one because we have really strong offenses and really strong defenses. It's always kind of tough to predict, but I think this one in particular is a little bit difficult. However, I think it's going to be a lower scoring game. And I think for Mahomes to be the optimal captain, you probably need a higher scoring game. Unless he does rush on in, then I guess it's possible. But I plan to be underweight on Mahomes in the captain spot, where he's getting 15%. In the flex, where he's getting 49%, I'll probably still be a little bit underweight because I'm leaving some salary on the table. He's pretty expensive. I don't think I'll be much underweight there. I think I'll probably be pretty close to the field in the flex, a little bit underweight. Definitely underweight. I'll probably cap myself at 10% at most Mahomes captain. In the and when I have Mahomes at captain, it's also a little bit murkier than usual because, again, he's not usually, we don't think of him as being a rushing quarterback, but he is willing to in the playoffs. So it's Harder to know exactly how to set the rules for Mahomes. He also spreads the ball around, so that's he's kind of a frustrating quarterback to know what to do with from a stacking standpoint. He's not like a Matthew Stafford, where it's just like if you have him in the captain spot, you always want him double stacked. Wherever you have him in your lineup, you always want him stacked because he's condensed. He's just throwing to 2 to 3 pass catchers generally, and he's not doing anything on the ground. That's like the easiest case. Mahomes is like the most difficult case because he spreads the ball around and he can run occasionally. I think ultimately, though, I am going to treat Mahomes like a non-running quarterback for the most part, meaning I'll always stack him regardless of where he is in my lineup. And when I have him in the captain spot, that's where I'm a little bit murkier. I'm deciding between whether I'm going to require 1 or 2 pass catchers. I think that if I were playing 20 lineups or fewer, I would set it to 2 for sure, like require 2 when I have Mahomes in the captain spot. I think that's how I'm going to play it. I think I'm going to require 2 in the in the flex when I have Mahomes at captain, but I think that it is, if you wanted to set it at 1 with Mahomes at captain, I think that is totally reasonable here. Jimmy says, I thought to myself, I'm actually starting a little bit earlier than usual today. I guess I should have pointed that out to people. I usually start right when inactives come out, 90 minutes prior to lock. Starting earlier today because I want to get going, spend a little bit more time on my lineups, and then also have to get to Super Bowl festivities. And I did, apologies for not inviting everybody to the Super Bowl party, Stephen. I'm sure you would have flown in from the Northeast. I'm going to a friend's house though, so I can't invite people to my friend's house. Anyway, starting a little bit earlier, maybe I'll spend a little more time on lineups as a result. But yeah, my take on Mahomes, probably going to be a little bit light overall. On the other side, we have Jalen Hurts projected for 45% flex ownership. He is $400 more expensive than Mahomes. Also projected for 13% captain ownership. I don't mind the Hurts ownership as much as Mahomes. He's getting a little bit less for one thing, both in the captain and in the flex. He also, Hurts averaged over 40 rushing yards per game this year. Also scored 14 rushing touchdowns in 15 games. So he, in a lower scoring game, Hurts is more likely to put up a higher score. Hurts is also, he is not tough in the sense that you don't need to stack him anywhere in your lineup like that. That's pretty clear. You can play him in the flex unstacked. You can even play Hurts in the captain spot unstacked because scoring 2 rushing touchdowns, definitely not out of the realm of possibility for Hurts. I might set a rule requiring 1 when I have him in the captain spot. I probably won't set any rules for Hurts. But I generally prefer to have him stacked when I have him in the captain spot. I've said it before. I still think it's true. I actually think Cody Main actually used some data to prove what I kind of thought was true, which is that it tends to go under owned when you have a rushing quarterback in the captain spot. Overstacking them, people just don't do it as much. They don't multi-stack them. You usually just do 1 pass catcher. So I do like the idea of having lineups where I have Hurts in the captain spot and having 2-3 pass catchers from the Eagles in the flex. I'm not going to force it though with my optimizer. So I guess I'm hoping for it. Maybe I'll hand build some of my lineups. But I think that it's generally a good idea. But yeah, you don't need him to be stacked anywhere because of how much he does run. He's pretty straightforward in that sense. Good to see Sean Geezy in chat. Have not seen Sean around recently, but good to see you, Sean. Sean says, looking forward to the show, Neil. Always the best Showdown content in the industry. Appreciate that, Sean. Says, any thoughts? Any real off the board captains for the Millie? Yeah, we can look at off the board captains. I'm probably not doing too many that are like truly off the board. Not usually how I play, but let's see. I think Juju Smith-Schuster at 1% captain ownership. That's pretty off the board. I don't hate it. I think Juju, we'll talk about it when we get to receivers, but he ran 56% of the routes in the last game. I like him quite a bit as a pretty low owned option overall. And he's projecting for 1% in the captain spot. So I'd say Juju is one that I would consider in the captain spot, who's pretty off the wall. DeAndre Hopkins, if you want to get really off the wall, projected for 0.5% ownership at captain. He's kind of the opposite in some ways of Juju in that he was down to 29% routes in the last game. But I pointed out in my article, I think he has 9 end zone targets in 12 games with the Chiefs. And even though he's lost some of his role, or seems to have lost some of his role in the playoffs, which is, I think the best sample size we have right now is looking at the playoffs. I still think DeAndre Hopkins is just he's a great player. I think when they use him, they're a little bit more likely to use him in the red zone. Um, and I think it's going to be a low scoring game. So I think that like touchdowns are really going to be at a premium in this game. Obviously, I don't know if it's going to be a low scoring game, but that's kind of what I'm anticipating is a fairly low scoring game. So I think that, or I think it could be a pretty low scoring game where touchdowns really matter more. And I think DeAndre Hopkins is about as likely as anybody to score a touchdown. Obviously not quite as likely as some, but fairly likely. So I think that Hopkins, Juju, those would be probably my favorite off the board, like 1% owned captain plays. I don't think there's anybody else that I really love down there. But if you want to play like slightly less off the board, I also think like Kareem Hunt 3%. Would anybody be shocked if Kareem Hunt scores a couple touchdowns, just like gets it at the 1 yard line? Due to those, of course, those fake penalties where the Chiefs benefit and they get the ball to 1 yard line. I'm joking about that. I have no takes there. But Kareem Hunt just scoring a couple 1 yard touchdowns would not be that shocking. He's only getting 3% ownership, so I like that. Hollywood, I think, looks good at 4%. DeVonta Smith looks good at 6%. So those are some of the sort of off the wall options that I'd throw in there as well. Okay, I think we've said all that needs to be said about quarterbacks already, so I am going to move on to running backs. Justin Watson playing today, you think? I think he's playing. I don't think he's going to be inactive unless I miss something. I don't think he's going to play much. He's just, his role has not been great. We'll get there when we talk about receivers, but I'm not expecting much from Justin Watson. All right, moving on to running backs. Obviously, we can start on the Eagles side with Saquon Barkley. Barkley looks pretty great to me. In the captain spot, projected for just 12% ownership. Sort of tough to get there because he is the most expensive player on the slate by far. But I've already mentioned some cheaper options that I think are pretty viable. And there are a couple mid-range options that are really good as well. So I like Barkley as a captain. I think he would be the least surprising player on the slate to score 2 touchdowns and have 150 yards. Like he's clearly the likeliest on the slate to do so. I want to give a shout out to Ryan Heath at Fantasy Points. Did a great article looking at matchups. And there is, he was talking about the scenario where the Chiefs stack the box, which I think is fairly likely here. Again, obviously we don't know, but I think it's not unlikely that the Chiefs stack the box quite a bit. They like to take away the other team's best players. I think Saquon is probably the best, the most dangerous player on the Eagles. And it wouldn't be surprising if they just say, let's make the passing game beat us, because the Eagles haven't really wanted to pass. Their pass rate has been low all year. So I think that there is a real possibility that the Chiefs are stacking the box quite a bit against Saquon. And I'm not going to pull up the article. It's actually free if you want to check it out at Fantasy Points, the article that Ryan Heath wrote on matchups, advanced matchups article. But the gist of it is Saquon's average run when teams stack the box, have 8 in the box against him. His average run comes down quite a bit to like 3.8 yards per carry or something, way lower than when the box is not stacked. But his explosive run rate is basically just as high as any other time. So he generally, they're going to stop him earlier, but he's still, his explosive run rate, which is 15 yards or more, is considered an explosive run. His rate of those types of runs is about as good as ever. He said this week that he loves it when teams stack the box because it just means he needs to beat the first level, and then it's a lot easier to have a long run after the fact, and the stats kind of bore that out. So Saquon, still very capable of just busting off a couple 60-yard touchdown runs in this game. So I like Saquon quite a bit at captain at 12%. Don't think that should be a hot take. I think I'll be probably over that number as I'm coming away from some of that Mahomes ownership. Probably not by a lot, just because he is so expensive. And there are, like I mentioned, some other captain options that I like. But I think Saquon looks like a great captain option. In the flex, getting 38% ownership. If I can get there, I'd like to. I think that's a fine number. I think that's about where he should be in the flex, just given how expensive he is and how many other options there are. And it's also not like a great matchup. I think it's actually been better over the past 5 weeks. I'll pull up schedule adjusted over the past 5 weeks. The Chiefs has actually been, I think this is like 10th or 12th or something like that. Not a bad matchup for running backs over the past 5 weeks. But I do think it really comes down to what do the Chiefs want to allow the other team to do. I think they're going to make it tough on Saquon. Great defense in general. So I'm not expecting this to be an easy one for Saquon, but also the volume is there and the ability to just break off long runs really strong, obviously, for Saquon. So I think I'd like to be over 12% at captain. In the flex at 38%, I'd probably like to match the field, essentially. Okay. And then as far as other Eagles, I mean, we have Kenneth Gainwell, I think is likely to play. We should find out in 15 minutes if he is inactive. He was dealing with a concussion. Questionable last I looked, but it seemed like he was on pace to play. I guess we're gonna have to come back to that one because if he were out, then Will Shipley would become a really intriguing min-priced option. Would be somebody I'd have a lot of interest in. As is nobody like not an easy click either way. So let's see in terms of, and I don't love them as far as captaining goes. But Kenneth Gainwell projected for 2% ownership at 3,400, assuming he's active. I kind of like it. I think that's a fine play. Like he does get some run, and we can look at the. So this is for the full playoffs, and he left the last game with the concussion, but 7 carries, 3 targets on 11% rep participation in 3 games. Actually, let's look at the game log here for Gainwell. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so we went from I guess just this doesn't look like it. Last week's concussion affected it all that much. He went from 3 carries to 1 carry to 3 carries, and then 0 to 1 to 2 targets. So maybe we would have seen progression, another carry or 2, and maybe another target, a few more routes run. Regardless, I think Gainwell doesn't have a ton of standalone value. He has a little bit. We could see a scenario where Saquon just gets caught at the 1-yard line and they just run it in with Kenneth Gainwell because Saquon is gassed. That's always possible with these backup running backs. And then obviously also has awesome contingent upside. If anything happened to Saquon, I would expect it to be Gainwell, assuming Gainwell is active. So we'll get that news again in 12 minutes. So remind me to look once inactives come out. But I think that's really the only big one that we're really waiting on at this point. And then Will Shipley, if Gainwell's out, I'm going to love Will Shipley, but he's 2,400. He doesn't have really much standalone value. Only came in when the game was completely done and Gainwell was out last week. We saw Shipley come in and he had one really nice long run, which he's capable of doing, obviously. But he played 6 snaps when the game was completely out of reach. Did not get a target, did not run a route. So I think Will Shipley's more of a, I guess if this game is a complete blowout, then maybe at some point in the 4th quarter, they'll say, all right, let's put the rookie in. But I'm not expecting much from Will Shipley, and he's kind of expensive for that. I said he was a min-priced option. He's not even a min-priced option. He's 2,400. So that's a tough click. But Gainwell, I would kind of like if he is active. All right. So that's it for the Eagles side. All right, I'm checking in on chat and appreciate you guys. Some of you saying nice things. I have read some of them. Appreciate you. Let's see. People talking about the Phantom Flags. Any buffalo chicken dip on the menu tonight? I hope so. I don't know. I don't know what's going to be there. Would be a fan though. Yeah, this is kind of what I'm thinking too. It wouldn't matter if it's a blowout. This Super Bowl they're going to play until there's no seconds left. It'd have to be like a huge blowout. Yeah, it's the standards for what qualifies as a blowout like get bigger. But like if it's a 4 touchdown game with 3 minutes left, at that point they might put in Will Shipley. But yeah, you are correct that it is different than any other game where they're not saving anybody for anything at this point. All right, on the Chiefs side is where I have interest that I think differs from the field a little bit. We already mentioned Kareem Hunt as a captain that I kind of like at 3% ownership. I think that's a number that I'd like to be overweight to. You get Pacheco at 1%, and Samaje Perine at about 1% is also, you can throw him as one of those dart throw captain option. I think Samaje Perine fine from that perspective. In the flex, I really like Kareem Hunt. I think that he's a really strong option at 24% ownership at 6,400. When I say really strong, I probably mean I'm going to get to 35%. I don't mean I'm going to get to 70% Kareem Hunt, but I think that he's a pretty strong option at this ownership. I think I've even seen his ownership come in a little bit lower than this in some places. People aren't really excited about Kareem Hunt, but if you look at, I'm going to pull up just the game log for the Chiefs, so you can kind of see the progression. So we go from this is just the playoffs game log, but we go from in the divisional round, Isaiah Pacheco played 30% of the snaps, Kareem Hunt 48%. Pacheco had 5 carries to Kareem Hunt's 8. They both have 1 target. Kareem Hunt has 25.8% route participation. The conference championship, when they really needed him, they really leaned on Kareem Hunt a bit more. It's pretty clear that Isaiah Pacheco is just not fully healthy at this point. And the Chiefs seem to have realized that, and just they've kind of made Kareem Hunt their lead back here. Had 17 carries in the conference championship round on 48.6%. Sorry, that's 48.6% of the carries. He played 57.1% of the snaps, so that came up 9% in that game. His route participation jumped to 35.3%. He hasn't been really involved in the passing game, but clearly he's, somewhat, he'll should get a couple targets in a game. So promising to see the route participation come up a little bit for Kareem Hunt. Did see 1 target there. I think Kareem Hunt is a really strong option here. It's also the Chiefs, which I've said it many times. These are like my least favorite showdown sites because you never really know what Andy Reid is going to do with his personnel. But I think that it's a pretty good chance that Kareem Hunt is the lead back once again, that he does get like 15 plus carries. Maybe he sees a couple targets. And if any of those carries are at the goal line, obviously that helps quite a bit. I think he's scored a couple times recently, maybe both playoff games. He scored a short touchdown and has not really put up any huge games. So I think he's just scored 1 touchdown in each of those games. Actually, I can look. How many fantasy points has he scored on average? Yeah, 12.8 fantasy points per game in the 2 playoff games. I believe he has 1 touchdown in each of them, but he could easily score 2 of those short touchdowns instead, and suddenly you're going to really want Kareem Hunt in your lineups. So yeah, I think Kareem Hunt is a really strong play at 6,400. Pacheco, I am probably going to be underweight to 15%. Not by a ton, but probably a little bit underweight on Pacheco, just because, again, he's 5,200, so he really needs to put up some fantasy points to pay off that price tag. There are some other pretty strong options in his price range. Getting some ownership there, and just doesn't seem like he is healthy. The Chiefs they've decreased his usage down from, or I guess it's fairly stagnant, but his like percentage of the pie has gone down. 5 carries in each game so far. 2 targets in the most recent one, so I guess that's promising, but he was actually down to 17.6% route participation. That has decreased for Pacheco. I don't think the Chiefs are really buying in on Pacheco right now, and since he's getting 15% ownership, I don't think I really want to buy in either. Obviously, he has some contingent upside. If anything happened to Kareem Hunt, then Pacheco would get probably the bulk of the carries at that point. Don't even know that for sure. I think maybe Samaje Perine would get some of them, but Perine hasn't really been used as a runner, so it would probably be Pacheco getting the biggest boost if anything were to happen to Kareem Hunt. But he's 5,200, so he's takes a little bit more anyway to pay it off. It's a tough matchup. So all things considered, I'm probably going to be underweight to 15% on Isaiah Pacheco, which I love my backup running backs. So this is the spot where he's clearly too expensive. So this is when he's going to pay it off, obviously. But I'm going to be underweight. I don't think it's the best bet. Also, not a great matchup as we see here. This is running back. Second worst matchup against the Eagles over the past 5 weeks in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed per game. Everything looks tough. I'm still in on Kareem Hunt just due to the volume. But for the backup running backs who are getting some ownership, or I should say Pacheco specifically getting some ownership, I'm going to be a little bit underweight there. I do like Perine. He's only 1,200, so that's the big difference. Is he's $4,000 cheaper than Pacheco. Much easier to pay off 1,200 with a single touchdown than 5,200. He's also getting just 11% ownership, so cheaper, getting less ownership. I'd rather make that bet. We see P Ryan, like his usage just kind of fluctuates quite a bit. And I mean, look at expected fantasy points per game. Pacheco does have a big lead there in the 2 playoff games. I just think that P Ryan, you've seen it before many times where he'll go from like, all right, nobody's really thinking about P Ryan, and then suddenly they put him in a package that is in the red zone and he's being targeted in the end zone, and that's probably all you need at his price tag is one reception in the end zone, and he pays off his price tag on a low scoring slate. So I do like P Ryan here quite a bit. I think that he's one of the better, like lesser owned options and one of the better value options. The floor is still like 0 for P Ryan. He very much could not be involved at all. But if the Chiefs get behind, if they get into some 2-minute drill situations, I think P Ryan could pay off this price tag. And I like him a lot better than the 11% ownership that he's getting. So I do think I'll be pretty significantly, I shouldn't say pretty significantly, I might have close to double the field ownership on P Ryan, probably around double what the field is getting to on P Ryan is what I am going to shoot for. I think that he looks like a really strong play. So yeah, I like Hunt. I like P Ryan. I'm somewhat out on Pacheco. I suspect I'll be in the single digits there ownership for Pacheco. I'd rather either pay up for the actual lead guy or pay down for the guy who might get 0 usage but might just bink a touchdown at 1,200. All right, I think that does it for running backs. So I'll move on, talk about receivers, check in on chat. Okay, Jimmy says Gainwell had no injury. I mean, I guess we'll find out in 3 minutes, but that is good to hear. Yeah, it seemed like he was trending in the right direction. What's up, Elway's Army? Good to see you here. All right. Scrolling. Sean going in on Hunt. Yeah, I like that. No issue with 38%. All right. Carson Steele getting a long rush would just end me. I would just be so upset if it was Carson Steele. Yeah, I haven't even considered Carson Steele. I don't really think Carson Steele is much in play here. We can look at his. He's actually played more than I remember. 10 snaps in the playoffs. He has 0 carries, 0 targets, just being used as a fullback. But it wouldn't be, again, with Andy Reid, just like nothing should shock you. So like if Carson Steele happens to get that 1-yard touchdown instead of Kareem Hunt, I would be mega tilted. I don't think I'm going to get too much Carson Steele. Let me look at his price tag. Think if he's even going to be in my player pool. Because I don't really X anybody out of my player pool, to be clear. I didn't see him there. All right. Looks like he has a projection of 0. So, let's see. Carson Steele. He is the min price. So maybe I'll get to his projection of 0 ownership. He's not going to get obviously 0 ownership. If he were, I would actually like him if he comes in at like 0.1%. It would take sub 2% for me to really have interest in Carson Steele. Maybe not. He is min price, so he really doesn't need much, and it wouldn't be shocking to see him get a random goal line opportunity. I'm going to see where if he's getting any kind of ownership anywhere else. I haven't really given a ton of thought to Carson Steele just because he is a fullback, but it's the Chiefs. It's the Super Bowl. Wouldn't be shocked if he got an opportunity, but is he not projected here either? Hang on. All right, second place I look, he's also projected for 0 fantasy points, which also means he's probably projected for 0 ownership. Yeah. Okay, they have like 0.5% ownership. At 0.5%, I think getting to 1% Carson Steele seems fine. All right. Gonna move on to receivers. Hang on. Let's see. Can you settle an argument with my wife? When is the correct time to serve the main course at the party tonight? Depends where you are, probably. So I am in Minnesota. So the game starts at 5:30. I would probably wait until halftime in Minnesota. Like that'd be around 7 o'clock, which I think is a fine time for dinner. But if you're on the West Coast, you can wait a little bit longer. Obviously, if you're on the East Coast, I would probably not wait until halftime because that's a fairly late dinner. I'd probably serve it in the like at the end of the first quarter, maybe. But people in chat can weigh in. When is the correct time to serve? Pete says halftime is the answer. Okay. Wheels Up says, I do UFL content for DFS. I love it. You should have. I do. I also do UFL content. And I love doing you. I'll do it for fantasy points. Once again, this year, I'll do a show with Jake Truby every week for the UFL season. All right. Receivers. I'm just going to start looking at flex. No, I'll start with the Eagles because the Eagles are pretty straightforward. We have at captain AJ Brown projected for 10% ownership. I'm on it. I'm going to have at least 10%, not like a ton more, but I might get to 12, 14%, something like that of AJ Brown. I think taking a somewhat overweight approach to AJ Brown makes sense to me. 34% flex ownership seems fine. I think that's about right. So I think overall, I'll probably get to 50% AJ Brown, be slightly overweight to the field. But I think where I'm going to actually be overweight is in the captain spot more than the flex. That's another player that Ryan Heath wrote about in his advanced matchup article, which I thought was a really good write-up. AJ Brown would benefit quite a bit if the Chiefs do stack the box, if they really try to stop Saquon Barkley. Like AJ Brown in one-on-one coverage just feasts. So I think AJ Brown, given that, looks really good. Now the matchup, not ideal, actually projected to be shadowed by Trent McDuffie. But I think the potential that he will be seeing some single coverage here. I think that the coverage stuff outweighs the shadow projection here to me. So I like AJ Brown. I think I'll have him in about half of my lineups overall. And I think I'll have him, I'll be overweight in the captain spot. Just with the hope that the Chiefs really do try to stack the box and it becomes a really nice matchup for AJ Brown. So yeah, I think he looks fantastic. Also really love DeVonta Smith here. Probably maybe even more, to be honest. DeVonta Smith, he's 2,200 cheaper, projected for just 29.5% ownership in the flex. That's a number I'll almost certainly be above weight to, and just 6% in the captain spot. I love DeVonta Smith here. He ran in the slot 63% of the time in their most recent game. And if you look at schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to slot receivers, it's the best possible matchup with Kansas City. This has not been updated with the opposing team, but over the past 5 games, best possible matchup for slot receivers in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points has been against the Chiefs. And that's actually true for the entire season too, though the number has just gotten better in recent weeks. So it's 4.5 over expected on the season. Over the past 5 weeks, up to 7.5 better than expected. Just looks like a smash spot for a slot receiver against the Chiefs. DeVonta Smith also could benefit from the Chiefs deciding to load the box. If they're not really focused on Saquon, like I still think DeVonta Smith could get lost in the shuffle a little bit. Not projected for a shadow situation. So all things considered, I really love DeVonta Smith here. I think it's a great matchup for him. Everything looks great, and the ownership is a bit lower there. So DeVonta Smith is somebody I'll definitely be taking an overweight approach to in the captain spot, where he's getting 6%, and in the flex, where he's getting 29.5%. I think he looks great. And then from there, it's gross. You have Jahan Dotson, who just been bad. I mean, he's out there running his routes. Dotson is, where's his price tag? 1,600. So he's cheap enough and getting low enough ownership, 3.5%. As gross as it is, I think I want to be above weight to 3.5% on Jahan Dotson. He's unlikely to do much, but just one touchdown could pay off that price tag. He's going to be out there running his routes. Here, I'll pull up. So in the playoffs so far, Jahan Dotson has run 60% of the routes. He has just 2 targets in the playoffs. Now I'm forgetting, did he score a touchdown in the playoffs, or was that late in the regular season? He scored a touchdown within the past month or so, as I recall. I guess we can see here, 8.1 fantasy points across 3 games. That might have been just one game where he scored a touchdown. I'm trying to remember. Either way, I think that he's, end zone, no. Yeah, Jahan Dotson has 1 touchdown in the playoffs. At his price tag and his ownership, I think that he is somebody that I want to be slightly above way too. Even at this number, like I can't get that excited about Jahan Dotson, but like to get to 5%, I think 7%, I think that makes a lot of sense for Jahan Dotson if you're playing 150 lineups. And if you're playing 20, I'd have him in at least 1 or 2 also. So 5 to 10% ownership there also. I think he's just cheap enough. He's going to be running the routes. Just need him to randomly score a touchdown to look pretty good. And then you have Johnny Wilson. So Johnny Wilson in the playoffs, 7 routes. So not running a ton of routes, has not had a target in the playoffs. He is like an enormous, I think he's like 6'7". I feel like I've said this a million times on shows. Like he would make sense as a red zone target. That doesn't necessarily mean that he's going to get any end zone targets. But he's not the worst dart throw. I think Jahan Dotson probably a better dart throw, but Johnny, he's only 200. So like scoring 1 touchdown, like almost certainly pays it off for Johnny Wilson. Not necessarily for Jahan Dotson. Also just getting 2.5% ownership. I'm probably, if I could set it and forget it, I would try to match the field on Johnny Wilson. I think that's a fine number. That seems like about the odds that he scores a touchdown. And if he doesn't score a touchdown, I mean, I guess he's 200, so just like a reception for 8 yards might be enough if you need a 200 guy. He's maybe the likeliest of the 200 guys to get there. I don't know. I think the ownership is about right on Johnny Wilson because it's also pretty likely, as we just saw, that he's just not going to see any targets. Inactives did come out, so let me go look real quick at inactives, see if anything is surprising there. I don't know if you all have looked already. All right, Chiefs inactives, no surprises. All right. And then nobody that I was considering playing in DFS. Eagles inactives. Aeneas Smith is out. No surprises on the Eagles either. We do have Kenneth Gainwell back, so that's good to see. All right, people say my question on Dotson. Sean says my question on Dotson, will he get more points than P. Ryan? Andrew says I'd like to think Dotson's great up here. I don't think I agree with that. I think I prefer P. Ryan. I don't think that's a crazy take, but I think I prefer P. Ryan over Dotson. He is getting more ownership, but I think he's just like a little bit more likely to get that random end zone target than Dotson is, or at least to score with it. So I think I prefer P. Ryan, but yeah, I don't think that's a totally crazy take. All right. Now on to the Chiefs side. So yeah, I think that does it for the Eagles wide receivers. On the Chiefs side, Xavier Worthy has looked like an actual wide receiver 1 in the playoffs. He is 8,000, getting 37% ownership in the flex. In the captain spot, getting 9% ownership. I think my take is I have no issue with this 9% ownership in the captain spot. I think I'd probably like to match that. I think I'm going to be a little bit underweight to 37% Worthy in the flex just because of the price tag. I don't know. It's a tough one to read. I think that's like probably about efficient. I think because I'm taking the stance of taking an overweight approach to the more expensive Eagles receivers and an underweight approach to Patrick Mahomes, I think that I'm just naturally going to have to be underweight on Xavier Worthy to make that happen. So I think I'm shooting for like 30% flex ownership and 9% captain ownership on Xavier Worthy. But I don't have any like issue with his ownership. I don't feel that strongly about it. I think the biggest issue for me is I think with Mahomes getting so much ownership and particularly so much ownership in the captain spot, I think that because I want to fade that, I just naturally as a way to get different, I'm just making it my preference, I guess, to get to the Eagles receivers a little bit more. But I don't feel that bad about 37. Like I think 37% feels about right for Xavier Worthy. Um, Looking at his numbers in the playoffs, like it's pretty clear that he is the top pass catching option. 86% route participation, leading the team in the two playoff games. Has 13 targets across two playoff games. They've kind of schemed to get him the ball in both short throws and down the field. So I think like they want to have Xavier Worthy involved. But ultimately, I just think the ownership to me is a little bit more than I'd like to have given his price tag. I also like, and part of the reason that I'm having some cognitive dissonance as talking about Xavier Worthy is I don't feel that bad about Travis Kelce's ownership because I guess we'll talk about that when we get to tight ends. But like in my mind, I'm like I could just see Travis Kelce getting 12 targets randomly. Um, but I maybe it's just a liking for Worthy. So maybe I might have the wrong read on liking Kelce. And Kelsey's also more expensive than Worthy. Um, I don't know. I'm a little bit torn, but I think ultimately we'll talk about Kelce when we get to tight ends. I think ultimately I'll be a little bit light on Xavier Worthy, where he's getting this much ownership overall, but not by a ton. Behind Worthy is where it really gets interesting because we've got Hollywood Brown has been we've seen his route participation increase every week until finally in the conference championship the route participation actually dipped a bit from where it had been the week prior, but not by much. So we saw actually it's Marquise in here. So we saw the divisional round. He went from, so he was like 33% in his first game to 51% in his second game, something like that. And he saw 15 targets across those first two games that he played in the regular season. So I like jammed him in DFS during the divisional round. And then he saw just two targets. I don't think he even caught a pass in that game. I think he had 0 fantasy points. I might be wrong about that. But regardless, huge disappointment from an actual usage standpoint, but he did see, as I was kind of expecting and hoping, he did see his route participation jump to 71%. So was a big letdown, but also kind of promising to see that his route participation is up to what I would call like a full workload. Like this is probably just where they want him to be. This is probably not like being slowed by injury recovery at all. And he came up to 5 targets on 68% route participation in the conference championship round. I think the fact that we saw 15 targets in his first two games like shows that is within the range of outcomes that he could just like, especially now that he's running more routes, it wouldn't be that shocking to see Marquise Brown get 8, 9, maybe even double digit targets in a game. We can obviously see the floor is 2 targets, or maybe the floor is 0, but we've seen a floor there with the targets. But I think the ceiling is still there for Marquise Brown also, and he's pretty inexpensive. I think one of the better value-ish options, mid-range options on the slate. 5,400. I'm going to be overweight to this number for sure. I'll be in the 30s. I might have up to 40 something percent Hollywood Brown. I think he's a fantastic option. One of my favorite plays on the slate at this number. And we'll have to do a comparison of Hollywood Brown to Dallas Goedert. I think those are the two that are like the most comparable on this slate because the price tags are pretty similar, the ownership pretty similar. So that would be the kind of a decision point a lot of the time. You can also play them together in some lineups. But I think Hollywood Brown is a fantastic play, one of the better options on the slate. And then you have Juju Smith-Schuster. So Juju Smith-Schuster, and I'll show you the trend here for Juju looking at the game log in the playoffs. So it moves up from 29% route participation in the divisional round to 56% in the conference championship round. Also saw 3 targets in that game. And then actually I'll do a comparison here. So Juju jumps from 29% to 56%. Targets go up a little bit. To the comparison to DeAndre Hopkins kind of went the opposite direction from 42% down to 29% route participation. Still saw 2 targets in that last game. So I'll say this. I love Juju. If he was going to get 14%, I'd want to be way overweight to the field on Juju Smith-Schuster. I think that number is just too low for a guy who ran 56% of the routes and will he's different from Jahan Dotson in that wouldn't be that shocking to see him get 5 targets in a game or be targeted in the end zone, et cetera, et cetera. And he's actually not that old. I don't remember his exact age, but it's like 29 or something. Yeah, so I think that he looks great. Sean says, Neil, can you do the matchups on Worthy and AJ Brown? What do you mean by that? Show this page. So AJ Brown again, Trent McDuffie, Xavier Worthy, Darius Slay is projected, but also no shadow matchups projected for the Chiefs receivers. If you're talking about in the data suite playoffs, so I can't just pull up the data suite matchups page here. But so I'll start by saying Juju Smith-Schuster 14%. I want to be double that. I think is about right. He's only 2,000, ran 56% of the routes. Could see a handful of targets here, just 14% ownership. I think that he is probably my like overall 2,000 or cheaper. I think he is my favorite play on the slate. I think Juju just looks fantastic. I've been waiting for this ownership number to come up, and it hasn't really. Actually, I'm going to pull up on my end, just going to look at if it has come up elsewhere. Looking at the most popular place, and it's only slightly higher elsewhere. So yeah, I think I want to be double the field on Juju Smith-Schuster. Could certainly still fail, but yeah, promising trend there for Juju. With that said, doesn't make me hate DeAndre Hopkins either, because DeAndre Hopkins is projecting for 7.5% ownership. So he's 4,400. As we saw, only 29% route participation in the last game, kind of trending in the wrong direction there. But still, all things considered, I think that he is just cheap enough that if he scores a touchdown with 3 receptions for 30 yards, I think that could be optimal. And he could have more involvement than that also. I'm expecting it to be a low scoring slate again. So those touchdowns are just worth a little bit more. He's cheap enough, getting low enough ownership. I still think that he's pretty good. He might not be, he's no longer prime DeAndre Hopkins, but I still think that he is a totally fine like NFL receiver here. So yeah, 29% route participation in the last game does concern me a bit. But as I noted earlier, 9 end zone targets in 12 games with the Chiefs. So they do like to use him more in the red zone. They like to target him in the end zone. So I'll just make bets on DeAndre Hopkins. We're getting 7.5%. I'd like to be maybe double the field there, also getting to 15%. DeAndre Hopkins, I think, makes sense, whereas only 4,400, not getting a ton of ownership. Let's see. Projects better. Ted says, seems weird Mahomes projects better and for more ownership than Hurts. Is it just me? I agree. But I think that's the case everywhere. I think he's projected for more ownership and has a better projection. But yeah, definitely caught me off guard a little bit. But I think it comes down to that he does run a little bit more in the playoffs. So I think that has to factor into the projections a little bit. Yeah, Gerald, this is a good question. And I was thinking about that. I don't think that I'm going to set a rule saying you don't have them together. But I do think that makes sense. If you're using an optimizer where you can set a slight dock for them, I think that would make some sense, because I do think that they negatively correlate a little bit. I think if we do see Hopkins jump up to 50% route participation today and Juju Smith-Schuster jump back, I think that Juju Smith-Schuster would be more likely to jump back in that scenario. So yeah, I think that is not a bad idea to set some type of dock if you're using something that would allow you to do that, to just give a little bit more of the market share to the other. So yeah, I think that is a good question. And again, I don't think I'm going to set that rule, but I don't think it's a bad idea to have that rule either. All right. And then got asked about Justin Watson. I'll just pull up the other options here. So Justin Watson in the playoffs, just 3 routes run per game. That's 9.7% and 8.8% route participation. Has not been targeted in the playoffs. So I just, with Juju getting such low ownership, I just objectively think Juju is a much better play. He's low enough ownership that I have interest there. And I think So Justin Watson projected for just 3% ownership at 600. Wouldn't surprise me if he comes in a little bit higher than that. I think people still kind of think of it as a coin flip between those two. Like they're the same kind of like, yeah, they don't play that much, but if they catch a long one, I think casual viewers will, or sorry, casual players, DFS players, probably still view them pretty similarly. So it wouldn't be that surprising to me to see Justin Watson come in higher than this. With that said, at 3%, I still think he's a fine play. Like he is still always live to catch a long ball, just catch a touchdown. I think that's okay ownership. I've got no issue with 3%. Justin Watson, Nico Remigio, people are asking about. I don't even know if he's played any real snaps. I think he's just. Here, I'm just going to search Chiefs. Maybe I spelled his name wrong. Oops. Yeah, it looks like he has not run a route. You need to run a route to be registered on this, and looks like Nico Remigio has not run a route. So I guess if you want to play the return, kick return, you could do it that way, but it's not worth that much because you only score 6 points. You don't even get a reception for a kick return. You don't get any yards. So I think if you do play Nico Remigio, I would only play him in lineups with the Chiefs defense. If you think that 6 points is going to be enough for Nico Remigio, yeah, I'm probably not getting there to Nico Remigio, especially, oh man, he's getting 7.5% ownership. He's min price, so maybe that 6 points would be enough. I don't know. It's debatable. I think he's fine, but I'll be underweight to 7.5%, like for sure. If I get to 1%, 2%, I think that's a fine number. But yeah, I don't love that. That's too much ownership for a guy who's not running any routes in the playoffs. Several players ahead of him. But again, it is the Chiefs. You never know. Maybe Andy Reid just decides to randomly give him a look on an end around in the end zone or something. But it's a little bit of a thin bet to me, and the ownership is there. Any other Chiefs receivers? Let's see. Have I forgotten anybody? I don't think so. Nope. We got Watson, Juju, Hopkins. Yep, we're good. Okay. Moving on to tight end. I'm glad I started this one earlier. Much easier when you start this earlier. What's up, Simon? Good to see you. All right. So let's move on to tight ends. Start with Travis Kelce. So Kelce, I kind of already alluded to. Actually, did I move my sidebar down? I forget to do that. Yeah, let me do that. Travis Kelce looks fine to me. So he's 9,000 projected for 35.5% ownership in the flex. In the captain spot, Travis Kelce projected for 9% ownership. I think I'm questioning myself about thinking that the Kelce ownership is fine and the worthy is a little bit higher than I want it to be. Maybe I should flip it. Maybe Kelce is the one that I should be a little bit underweight to, because he's $1,000 more expensive. He's obviously unpredictable. So we know that Kelce can just randomly in the playoffs see 12 targets in a game. So it's possible he does that. I think that I'm actually going to take the same stance on Kelce that I did with Worthy, which is I probably end up a little bit light on Kelce in the flex because of the $9,000 price tag. And he's getting 36% ownership. I like him in the captain spot just for the potential that he does have 10 receptions for 110 yards and a touchdown. So yeah, I think Kelce is fine. I like him better in the captain spot. I think I'll shoot for 30% in the flex. Also, he's okay. In the playoffs, we can look at the game log here, I suppose. So we went from, and the rep participation up a little bit in the playoffs, went from 71% in the divisional round to 82.4% in the conference championship. 8 targets down to 4. Looking at the matchup for tight ends, I think it's a tough one for tight ends against Philadelphia. Yeah, it's the worst possible matchup in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed per game over the past 5 weeks. But it really just comes down to, are the Chiefs going to dink and dunk it back to Kelce over and over? Wouldn't surprise anybody to see Kelce get 12 targets in a game. So I think he's fine. I think I'll be a little bit light in the flex at 35.5%, and I think I'll probably be eat the 9%, might even be above weight to that in the captain spot. I think he looks like a strong captain option, just because in some scenarios he's going to be targeted quite a bit. So yeah, I think Kelce, fine. And then you have Noah Gray, who hasn't really had. There was a brief period where he's running like 40% of the routes and looked like a really strong option. I think maybe even more than that. But those days are behind us with Noah Gray. His route participation has come down quite a bit in recent weeks. So he's projecting for, my captain. Projecting for 11% ownership at 2,800. I think that's fine, but he's at this point, he's just needs a touchdown to pay it off, most likely player. Like he has not been running a ton of routes. If we look at his game log, down from 35.5% route participation in the divisional round to 17.6% in the conference championship, down from 3 targets to 0. I guess there's some possibility he gets back up to this kind of level of opportunities where if he catches 3 balls for 30 yards, like that might be enough at his price tag. But I think he's just fine. Like I think the ownership there on Noah Gray looks okay. He's not like a huge target for me, but I think it's low enough ownership that I think he's one of the better contrarian options on this slate, where he's getting 11% ownership, and is not the most not super unlikely to just score a touchdown on some. Doesn't even have to be a weird play, but they do sometimes target him. So I think Noah Gray looks fine. Peyton Hendershot, I don't know. Ran 2 routes each game so far. He is the ultimate, like, probably needs to score a touchdown to pay it off. He's also min priced. Getting 1% ownership feels about right. Probably want him in your player pool if you're 150 maxing. Otherwise, if you're playing 20 lineups, I probably would not have him in any lineups. Am I forgetting anybody on the Chiefs? Oh, that didn't work. Refresh this. I don't think I'm forgetting any Chiefs, but no. Okay. Yeah, then I don't have Hendershot in here with a projection. Okay. And then on the Eagle side, we have Dallas Goedert. I already mentioned like that's kind of a decision you might have to make, is Dallas Goedert and Hollywood Brown. Goedert getting 31% flex ownership at 5,800. Also getting 8.5% captain ownership. Hollywood Brown getting 4%. All things considered, I prefer Brown. Like if I'm making a 1v1 decision, I think just getting lower ownership. I think their range of outcomes is fairly similar, honestly. I think Goedert, gets there more with touchdowns and more receptions. Hollywood Brown just a little bit more likely to have a big play where you just get a ton of fantasy points on one play. But I think they just have a pretty similar range of outcomes, and Hollywood Brown is cheaper and getting less ownership. So my preference, if you have to choose between them, I'm going to have more of Hollywood Brown than Dallas Goedert. But I like Goedert too. Like I think I'll probably be with the field on Goedert in the flex. I'll probably be light on 8.5% in the captain. Actually, I don't even know if that's the case. Like that, given his price tag and what he allows you to do with the rest of your lineup, I think that's a totally fine number. So I'm probably like with the field on Goedert, but I prefer Brown. Like Brown is the one that I'm going to definitely be overweight to the field. I'd rather play 4% own Brown at captain than 8.5% Goedert at captain. So I might end up a little bit light on Goedert just because more often I'll take those shots on Hollywood Brown at a lower price tag and lower ownership. But none of that is to say that Goedert is not a great play. Like, I think those are the two like mid-range plays that I think really stand out. We did have somebody mentioned kickers earlier. We'll talk about the kickers a little bit too. They're also kind of in that same price range, and it's easy to overlook kickers. So don't want to overlook them in that price range either. But for the most part, it's Brown and Goedert for me. And then Grant Calcaterra, like, he's 1,000, projecting for 3.6% ownership. I think he's just a touchdown or bust play, down from 6 routes to 4 to 2 over the past 3 weeks. Has 1 target in that first game. Has not been targeted over the past 2 weeks. He is a classic backup tight end who I'm not really expecting much from, but he's a tight end. It wouldn't be that you see backup tight ends score touchdowns all the time. I think he's getting about the right amount of ownership, about 3.5%. Like I want him in my player pool in a 150 set, but I don't want to have a ton of Grant Calcaterra. Not a particularly strong bet because he probably needs a touchdown to pay off his price tag. All right, that does it for tight ends. All right. Oh, you know the deal. Giving us his lineup. Yeah, it doesn't look bad. Does not look like a bad lineup. Guessing you're gonna be splitting with that lineup though. Just know that, which maybe that's okay. All right. Moving on, defenses, kickers. So the kickers, we'll start there because I don't have that much to say about the kickers. I think they're just getting about the right ownership. I'm probably shooting for they're both getting Butker getting 16%, Jake Elliott getting 15%. I'm probably shooting for around there, somewhere between like 15 and 22% ownership. If I end up there with the kickers, I'll feel pretty good about it. I don't have any hot takes here. I think should be I'm expecting a low scoring game. So those, you get a couple 40, 50-yard touchdowns, field goals. I think they're going to look pretty good, but I don't have any real hot takes there. I think the ownership is about as it should be, maybe a little bit light relative to where I'd like to be. And then you have the defenses. So the Eagles are 4,200 projected for 16% ownership. The Chiefs are 4,000 projected for 15% ownership. I didn't pull up the page to look at it, but both quarterbacks have been sacked about the same number of times per game, like pretty close to the same number of times per game. Mahomes actually has thrown like 11 interceptions on the year to Hurts has thrown far fewer. But I think part of that is the Chiefs have thrown more. I don't know. I'm a little bit torn because my gut says I'd rather play the Chiefs defense than the Eagles defense, just because I know how good Mahomes is under pressure and how good he has been in the Super Bowl. Where it's like, I don't know, Hurts. I think he's a great quarterback, but also has not totally proven himself to the same extent as Mahomes in the playoffs. So if he got a little bit flustered in the Super Bowl, I would be less surprised. The Chiefs are also a little bit cheaper and getting a little bit less ownership. So I have a slight preference for the Chiefs at 4,000. But ultimately, I kind of think the ownership that each defense is getting, like the Eagles defense, is very good also. So probably the data, like the data probably is saying the Eagles defense is better because Mahomes has thrown more interceptions. They're just a very good defense in general. But it's close. I think that the ownership's here, and also neither of them is getting like 7% ownership. Like I think they're getting about the fair amount of ownership here. So I don't have any real hot takes with kickers and defenses. All right. I'm going to check in on comments. I'm curious if anybody else has any hot takes here. Oh, we got some bot in here. Try to get rid of that. All right. I'm going to take a brief look at FanDuel, and then I will play around with some lineups. Take any extra questions that you have. All right, so FanDuel MVP projected ownership. Mahomes, again, he's getting 25% projected ownership at the MVP spot. Your MVP on FanDuel, since there is no salary multiplier, you need your MVP to be the highest scoring player in your lineup. That's just way too much to me. Like Mahomes to me would be a pretty big fade on FanDuel in favor of some other players. I'd actually rather play Hurts, I think, at the same ownership. But it's close between those two. If I were just playing one lineup, actually, I hand built 1 or 2 lineups on FanDuel. The first lineup that I made was AJ Brown at MVP, 8%. Just wouldn't be at all surprising if he's the highest scoring player on the slate on FanDuel. So I like that number. I think Saquon at 17.5% looks pretty strong also. So I think in general, I prefer the non-quarterbacks But I also think like Xavier Worthy at 4.5%. Kareem Hunt again 3%. DeVonta Smith 3%. Goedert, I think 2.5% is probably fair on FanDuel, where you don't get a point per reception, you only get half a point. No, I think that's a fair enough number. Hollywood Brown 2%. I prefer that again. So yeah, I think my biggest take on FanDuel for MVP is I'd rather get underweight to both these quarterbacks. Maybe I'll shoot for, 20% Hurts and 15% Mahomes, and then distribute that across more of Barkley, AJ Brown, Travis Kelce, Xavier Worthy, Kareem Hunt, DeVonta Smith, maybe even Dallas Goedert and Hollywood Brown. Probably would include those two. Just like a little bit of a bump to everybody else. Be underweight to the field on Mahomes and Hurts. And then in the flex, Mahomes also getting the most ownership. Hurts right there. Barkley only getting 29.5% ownership, but that's because he's 16.5. He's pretty expensive. Tough to fit him in there with other players you like. I still think that's a pretty fair number at 29.5%. I would try to get to more than that. AJ Brown, obviously $4,000 cheaper than Barkley, getting 28% ownership. I like that quite a bit. Worthy and Kelce, a little bit cheaper relative to the others here, relative to DraftKings. Really like DeVonta Smith here, where he's getting just 22.5% ownership. Hollywood at 18.5% looks really good on FanDuel to me. Again, Kareem Hunt. Yeah, I think he looks pretty good at 20% ownership on FanDuel. Also, I'd take an overweight approach there. And then, yeah, Hopkins at 6% ownership on FanDuel looks even better to me than on DraftKings. I think that a single touchdown could go a little bit further there. Juju at just 8% ownership. I think that looks pretty great too. Taking over on Juju there. P Ryan 6.5% looks pretty good. Dotson 2.6%. It's a lot of the same players on FanDuel as it is on DraftKings, it looks like. All right, I'm going to check in on any questions. Okay. I'm going to, so I'm going to play with lineups here. I'm actually going to set up my optimizer here. So if anybody wants to, if you want to use an optimizer and you have not yet, I'm going to show you how I'm setting mine up. Actually, am I going to be able to do this with I think I will. Yeah. So I'm going to try building them in the Opto first, and then maybe I'll hand build one or two also. But I want to show you how I would set this up, how I'm planning on setting this up. So I'm going to go first to build rules. Actually, I'm going to move this to DraftKings. And if you don't already have access to Roto Grando's Lineup HQ, you can get $10 off using promo code Flannel. I think there's a link in the description of this video also, but either way, just use promo code Flannel. You can get $10 off and support me also. So I'm going to start by going to build rules. Actually, let me see what you can see. Yeah. Starting with build rules. And I'm going to go to, so I just do like 10% randomness. Nothing magical about this. This is, you can do higher or lower. But 10% is enough that like, it's not, I'm going to get a little bit of different lineups each run, but also it's low enough number that I feel like I have some control, and changes that I make are going to change things. For Showdown, I don't do any unique players, so I allow just one player difference in each lineup. And I'm going to set a max exposure in the captain spot to 20%. I like to spread out my captain ownership. And then finally, I like to set a salary cap here. So I think I'll probably set the cap to, it kind of depends on your risk tolerance here. I used to set this really low. I think for this slate, it's fairly tight pricing, and I'm playing a lot of lineups. So I think I'm just going to set it at 49,400. But again, if you're just like maxing out the mini max, and you want to like up your equity or your chances of winning it solo, I think like setting that to 48 or something could make sense on this slate. Or if you just want to like have the best shot at the winning lineup, just like 49-8 or something like that, the winning lineup without duping 1,000 ways. So I think 49.4 seems about right for this slate. for me. Do I want to sometimes I set a minimum fantasy points threshold just so that I can sort of exclude some players if I don't like how much I'm getting. But I'm going to leave that for now and just see if anybody gets in there that I really don't like. Then I'm going to go to groups. And this is, we talked about it earlier. What do I have in here already? I'm just going to delete this. Oh, I was trying something earlier. So I'm going to set groups, new group. And I don't know that I'm going to set any Hurts rules at all because I think you can play him completely unstacked. And I'm going to allow for that on this first run. Maybe I'll start with setting a Mahomes. So I'm going to do Mahomes captain. I'm going to add in all of the Chiefs that I want to include as pass catchers, considered pass catchers for the rules that I set. So I'll start with Worthy and Hollywood Brown and Juju and Hopkins, Justin Watson. I'm not going to include Nico Remigio because he's not involved in the passing game. I think that's all of the Chiefs receivers I'm considering. And then Kelce, Noah Gray. I would also include P. Ryan. Could consider including Pacheco. I think I'm just going to include P. Ryan as a pass catcher. But I think that is going to be the group that I use. And I'm going to start by just saying 1 to 4. So what I've said here is in lineups that have Mahomes in the captain spot, I want to have 1 to 4 of these players in the flex. That's the rule that I've set so far. Now in lineup HQ, I'm going to duplicate this lineup. And in my duplicate lineup, I'm going to change this from Mahomes captain to just Mahomes in the flex. And then now I have to add all the same players in the captain spot. Because I'm saying if you have Mahomes in the flex, I want to have at least one of this group in my lineup. I guess I don't need to include all of these players, but at least the ones that I want to consider in the captain spot here, which is most of them. Did I do Kelce? Yes, I did Kelce. I don't really care to have Watson or P. Ryan or Gray in the captain spot, so I think I'll skip them for this rule. But then normally I would, so if I had Mahomes 2 to 4 here, I would normally move this down to 1 to 3. I think I'm just going to keep it at 1 to 3. So if I have Mahomes in the flex, I want to have 1 to 3 from this group in that lineup also. And normally if we didn't have a rushing quarterback on the other side, I'd set a rule for that quarterback too. But because it's Hurts, I don't think I'm going to include any Hurts lineups. And this is just a preliminary. I want to see. So now I go back, now that I've just set these rules, and I really don't set any more rules in that. You can set rules that say if I have Kelce in the captain spot, I don't want more than 2 other Chiefs pass catchers. You can do stuff like that. I really am pretty minimalist with my rules, which I'm not sure if that's correct, but that's the approach that I take. Okay. So now I'm just going to build 150 lineups and see what they look like. And then once I see what they look like, I go back and adjust my projections to get to players that I like. Juju's projected for about 4 fantasy points. Getting rid of the bot. I think kicker captain is pretty fine today. It's not something that I'm like going out of my way for. Not fortunate in there, but yeah, I think that's not a terrible idea. Certainly viable because it could be a really low scoring game where it's just like, and one of these kickers could score, have 5 field goals. So yeah, I like that. All right. What's up, Obi-Wan? Good to see you. Yeah, Sunday fun day is right. Okay. Hockey Freak Sean says less than 50 minutes till lock. Yeah. All right. So this is my first set of lineups that I made. I got to, and you can see here, 75% Mahomes, which, yeah, I don't like that. I don't want to have that much Mahomes. So this is where I would have to go back and adjust. The first lineup that I get to, I think this is the top project. Yeah, so these are sorted by fantasy points. The top one would be Mahomes with P. Ryan and Kelce and Worthy, and then you've got Hurts and Goddard in there. So even though I didn't force a Hurts stack, I got one in that first lineup. You can see the second lineup looks pretty similar to the first in a lot of ways, et cetera, et cetera. But here, I just make sure that nothing looks completely off of my lineups. Like, do I totally hate this? Maybe sometimes I'll look at it and I'll say, okay, I set this and I only required one pass catcher with Mahomes in the captain spot, and I'm getting to that a ton. And I want to allow it because I want to have some of that, but I prefer generally to have the majority have multiple pass catchers. Looks like my Mahomes captain lineups, I'm getting to multiple pass catchers in most of them. So I think I'm okay with that rule. But now I'm going to go back and you have to, as I go, I delete my previous builds because when you go to look at your player pool and you sort by actual exposure, if you want to see the actual exposure, it's going to include all of your builds, not just your most recent. And I want to see just from my most recent build as I adjust things. So I'll go through and I'll adjust projections before I do anything else. And I can see right away, I'm getting too much Mahomes. I don't want that much Mahomes. I am going to cut back pretty significantly on his. I'm going to do it from the flex spot for the first run. I'm just going to cut this down to 19.8. So now he's less expensive than Hurts. I can see that I want him to project worse than Hurts if I want to get a similar amount there. Actually, I'm going to cut back on both of them. So I'm going to cut Hurts back to 19.6 and Mahomes back to 19 and see from there where it goes. I'm getting to a ton of Xavier, Worthy, Dallas Goedert. Usually I like to start with giving bumps in projection before I start cutting back. As you can see, I already cut back here just to kind of save myself some time here. But getting to a ton of Dallas Goedert. Actually, I'm going to sort by fantasy points here so we can kind of see what's going on. So Saquon only getting a 19%. I should get more now that I cut back on both Hurts and Mahomes. So maybe I'll just leave that there for now. AJ Brown, I'm going to give a little bit of a boost to, not a huge one now because I should get more with the cutback on Hurts and Mahomes. Worthy, I'm getting to more than I'd like. So I'm going to cut that back a little bit. And I just do this really incrementally. DeVonta Smith, I know I want more, so I'll give him a little bit of a bump. And you can be a little bit more like your first go around, like you can just see kind of get an idea of how much you want to change things based on other players, like in their price range. Like, who am I getting to a ton of? If I'm getting to, like, I cut Xavier Worthy back to essentially the same projection as Travis Kelce, and he's $1,000 cheaper. So I can assume here that I'm probably still going to get to more than 35% of Xavier Worthy, giving them the same projection. So I can already see, like, I probably want to go a little bit lighter than that. Maybe I'll just do it right now. I'll go to I sorted by fantasy points. I meant to sort by salary, actually. It's the easier way to do this. So I want to cut Worthy down to 15.6, we'll say for now. DeVonta Smith I brought up a little bit. Kareem Hunt I want to bring up also. Bring him up to 12 fantasy points, which it's a big jump, but I know that I want to get overweight to Kareem Hunt. Don't need to cut Goddard much, but I was getting 63%. Because I moved other players up, I'll naturally get less Dallas Goedert, but I'm still just going to cut him back a little bit. Hollywood Brown I like quite a bit. So I'm going to move him up to getting to 0% Isaiah Pacheco. So I think I'd like to adjust that. See what that does. Actually, I'm going to move these both up to there we go. DeAndre Hopkins not getting to any currently. Just going to bump him a bit. Eagles defense getting to 6. All right, I'm going to do this real quick, and then I'm going to do a run. So Juju, I know I want more. P. Ryan, I'm already getting to a good amount. Dotson, I think I want a little bit more. Not sure if that'll do it. As here, I'm getting to a little bit of EJ Jenkins, the tight end for the Eagles. If I get to 1%, I guess I'll probably accept it. 2% Carson Steele. That's interesting with his basically zero projection. 5% Johnny Wilson, 3% Nico Remigio. I did not set a rule, so that's another rule that I could set is Nico Remigio as my conditional player. I didn't even think about it because I might not even want to play any Nico Remigio, but I can just do new group, say use conditional player, Nico Remigio, play either Chiefs defense captain or Chiefs defense in those lineups. Okay. All right, now I'm gonna run again, and this is all I do. I'm gonna do this multiple times until I get to player pool that looks good to me. Make sure that my lineups all look pretty good in terms of like the correlations, if they correlate well enough. Yeah, it is Saquon Barkley's birthday. Good shout out there. The Sean V shout out from Obi-Wan. Yep, TB pointed that out. All right. 2v2 for cash, Barkley and Juju versus Goedert and Worthy. I think that's got to be Barkley and Juju for me. I probably did for cash. I would play whichever one of that 2v2 projects better, which I think would be Barkley. I didn't look at it. Johnny Wilson, I think is fine. What's up, Jay Blake the King? I think Johnny Wilson is fine at the like virtually zero ownership. I probably want 2% Johnny Wilson, something like that. All right, so this run, you can see it's already looking a little bit closer to what I wanted to just from adjusting the projections. So now I'm at 57% Hurts in the flex, 56% Hollywood Brown, 54% Dallas Goedert. And this is my whole process here is now I just go back through it until I get to the exposures that I like or something approximating what I'd like them to be. And thankfully, I'm giving myself more time today than I have done all year. I've been giving myself like 5 minutes to try to do this, but now it's just the same process over and over. Now, at some point, one thing that's nice about Lineup HQ is I can just say at some point if I'm getting close to lock and I'm not getting to exposure that I like, you can set a max, which you can't do in a lot of optimizers. Just say like, and sometimes I'll do this at captain. Just say, all right, I'm still getting 20% Mahomes at captain. I don't want more than 10%. I might just set a max here at 10% in a bit. But I'll do one more run, and then I'm going to call it. I'll look for check questions one more time before I go. But I'm just going to do one more run since I've got time to do it here. So now I'll go back to the flex. You can see it's still not getting too much Saquon. So I'm going to go to 21% Saquon. Bring up my projection on Saquon to 21. Should naturally cut back a little bit on Hurts and Mahomes, but I'm just going to also cut off here just a tiny bit. AJ Brown, 33%. I'm just going to boost this a little bit. I'm just doing this ever so incrementally. Still getting a 53% Xavier Worthy. I'm going to cut that back a little bit more. DeVonta Smith looking good. Kareem Hunt, I'm a little bit overweight to the field. I like that. Dallas Goedert and Hollywood Brown. I like them both quite a bit, but I'm going to cut back Goedert to 11.4. Hollywood to 11.2. Pacheco, I'm just getting 2.7%. I do want to be light on Pacheco, but I probably want a little bit more than that if I'm playing this many lineups. Oh, and this is here we're getting to the. So I brought Pacheco up to 8.8. I'm going to bring Butker up to also 8.8. I think I want to have more of Butker than Pacheco, and because he's cheaper, if I give him the same projection, I should most often get more of Butker than Pacheco. I'll bring up Jake Elliott. Also, DeAndre Hopkins. Now I clearly need to boost him more because I do like Hopkins a bit. I'm trying to get to like 15% there, I think. Eagles and Chiefs, I'm not getting into much of either, so I'm just going to boost them a bit. I'm not getting any Kenneth Gainwell right now. I don't want to get 0 Gainwell, so I'm going to bring him up to 5 and see what that does. Now my Noah Gray cut back with some of the changes I made. So maybe now I need to move. Maybe we'll move him up too. And I can see if I'm getting 0.7% of Noah Gray at 4.3, probably going to get something similar to Gainwell at 600 more. So I'm going to move Gainwell up to 5.8, Gray up to 5. We'll see what that does. Smith-Schuster, I'm still getting 29%. I think that is about what I want it to be, but because I've changed other players, I probably need to just give him a little bit of a boost to keep it close. Might have to do more than that. We'll see. Currently not getting into any Shipley, which I guess I can accept that. Currently not getting into any Jahan Dotson. I want to get just a little bit, so I'm going to boost him a little. Getting to about the amount of P. Ryan. This still might be even a little bit higher than I want, but I'm not going to adjust his projection because I'm changing others. And now with the changes to the players that I do want, now I'm getting to 0% of Paris Campbell, Peyton Hendershot, EJ Jenkins, Carson Steele, Johnny Wilson. So maybe I'll just give a slight bump. So Calcaterra, I'll bring up to. I also I wouldn't be that mad if I get to 0 of these players, but I'm just going to give. Maybe not even. Maybe I'll go like 0.6. Because I moved up Barkley, I'm also a little bit more likely to get to these cheap players. I don't think I want EJ Jenkins. Maybe just leave him out. Draw a line. Gonna feel really foolish when he scores a touchdown. All right, we'll do that. I'm sure some of you are leaving now to your Super Bowl festivities, so have fun. Good luck tonight. Hopefully, we'll make some money. Let me know if you do make some money and you think that that the show helped. I always love to hear about it. Favorite captain DK single entry. I think I've come around to DeVonta Smith as my favorite. It's between him and AJ Brown, probably. All right, so that you can see did not bring down my Mahomes that much. I thought I'd bring it down more, and now it's just the same thing over and over for me. So the Barkley did come up a bit. Hurts still about where I want to be. I probably need to bring Mahomes down even a little bit more. AJ Brown, Kelce, Worthy. Down Worthy a little bit. Get into about the right amount of Smith, Hunt, Goedert, and Brown. I think I'm going to bring them both down to 11. This will probably give me more of Brown than Goedert because he's cheaper, and also bring them both down a little bit. Pacheco, I'm just going to bring up slightly. Let's do this. Hopkins, I'm getting to about what I want. Eagles and Chiefs, bring them up slightly. Ray. Now you'll notice that my projections are getting, as I do this, further and further away from what they were originally. So this is dangerous once you do it enough times, which is why I do it incrementally, but I do kind of keep in mind always like what were the relative projections and how much do I want to get away from them is something to always obviously think about as you're doing this. All right, so now I'm getting to a little bit of got a share of Steele, a share of Johnny Wilson. Just going to bring up. Now I'm down to 18.7% Samaje Perine, which is not low enough that I'm that. I think that's fine. And I'll do it one more time, and then I'm going to call it and finish off stream. D-Bro. What's going on, D-Bro? No, I'm not taking it up to lock. I'm calling it in a minute here because I got to get to a party. I got to finish my lineups too, but I just wanted to kind of show people what my process looks like using Lineup HQ. Of course, now this is pretty late in the year, so unless anybody's doing it right now, playing a lot of lineups probably doesn't help anybody that much. But D-Bro says all the damn Goedert. So I like Goedert. As I've said, I prefer Hollywood Brown if I'm choosing between the two of them, but I think Goedert looks pretty good here. So now you can see Hollywood Brown, now my highest exposed player. So we're getting closer and closer to how I like it. Now I'm down to 49% Mahomes. I'll keep adjusting. It is looking like I can play a good amount of Mahomes and still be overweight to AJ Brown, DeVonta Smith, Saquon Barkley, etc. So maybe it's not as prohibitive as I was thinking, but I'll probably bring down the Mahomes and get to more of others. Now I'm down to 25% Dallas Goedert, so I probably do need to project him at least slightly better than Hollywood Brown to not completely lose him. 21% Kelce, probably want to come a little bit higher than that. But you can see in the captain spot, I'm still at 19% Mahomes, and this is where at some point I'll set a cap and say I don't want more than 10%. But I do it first by going through and adjusting projections. I am going to get going because I do need to leave momentarily, and I got to finish making my lineups. Let's see. Would you rather chop or not win-ish? What? Would you rather chop or not win? Oh, maybe you're talking to somebody else. I would rather win and chop, personally. But I'd rather not chop 1,000 ways. So that's what I'm trying to avoid here. All right. Yeah, all the wings are going to be gone probably. It's not a huge party anyway. Also learned that one of my friends is not going to be there because he chopped off part of his finger today. So a smaller party than we were anticipating anyway. But this is the final Flannel Up and Showdown of the season. Have really appreciated all of you being here throughout the year. Has really meant a lot. Having people show up time after time. Yeah, I'd play worthy a captain without Mahomes. I think that's totally fine. He can score rushing touchdowns. He can rack up PPR points. Certainly viable. Have very much appreciated you all year. If you want to keep in touch, you can join the Flannelverse Discord. The link is in the description of this video. Of course, you can find me on the socials at PlayerQDFS. You can hit me up anytime there. My DMs are open. Anything else? I'll be doing, again, NBA content on this channel. We have the All-Star break coming up, and then I'm going to Cancun for a week. So it's really going to take off more so in March, where I do more of that. But we'll be getting back into best ball content, etc., etc. So would appreciate if you subscribe to the channel, join the Discord, whatever else. Hopefully you guys keep in touch over the next 8 months, 9, I guess 7 months, 7 months until we have football again. Over the next 7 months, if you want to keep in touch, would love to hear from you. Thank you all very much. Has been a great year. Let's win some money tonight. Yeah, outside the box will be back. All right, let's win some money tonight. Good luck, everybody. Talk to you soon.